This morning we begin a new stewardship sermon series called Solomon Says. Some of you hear that word stewardship and you know that's a loaded word in church and you clench instinctually. You clutch your wallet. You want to make sure there's no one going to stand out there and shake your ankles when we get done with worship today. You're girding yourself for the inevitable plea for money from the church, and I'm not going to lie to you. Stewardship of our money and our possessions is going to be a part of this series, but it's not going to be the whole of this series. And we will make our commitment to next year's ministry budget on Sunday, October 28th, the end of this month. I hope you'll join us for that. But stewardship is about more than just money. It's about more than just what you give or don't give, how generous you are. It's about how you take care of, how you manage what you've already got. Everything from your body to your soul, to your stuff, to your relationships, to your church. How do you care for all of this that God has entrusted to you? How do you wisely use what God has given you to make a difference in the lives of others, to make a kingdom difference in the lives of people around you? I think we can all agree, at least I can confess to you, that I am not the best steward of all the things that God has given me. I could use some advice, some learning. I continue to grow in that. A little instruction, some advice on how to do a better job would probably be a great thing. That's why we often look to someone who's maybe a little older, a little wiser, someone with wisdom and experience so that we can say, well, how did you do this? How did you manage this? How did you grow and be the generous person that you are? We want their advice. We want their teaching. You know, it's not always easy to do to follow what other people say. If you have kids or you remember the playground not too long ago, you may remember playing Simon Says as a kid. If you haven't played Simon Says in a while, let me remind you, one person is Simon. All the rest of the kids are listening for the instructions that Simon gives. You know, stick out your tongue, jump up and down, do 3 jumping jacks. But you only do it if the person first says, Simon Says. If you do the action without a Simon Says, well, you're out. It's actually a really old game. I get to research all kinds of weird things for sermons. This game started back in the 1200s. How about that? Really old game. And it's been translated to numerous different cultures and different places, but it's all pretty much the same game. Probably because it's such a simple game. I confess that I am a bad Simon Says player. I get overconfident. I stop paying attention. I get distracted, and before I know it, my children have tricked me, and I am out. You know, the stakes in Simon Says aren't very high, but the stakes in our lives are significantly higher. So in this sermon series, we need a new Simon. Thus, we are going to do what Solomon says. We're going to look at the life teaching, the generosity teaching that Solomon gave to us through the book of Ecclesiastes. For those of you who are maybe unfamiliar with Solomon or don't remember your children's Sunday school lesson on Solomon, he was the king, the son of King David and the king of Israel, born to David's mistress Bathsheba. He is traditionally understood to be the author of most of the wisdom literature in the Bible. That includes Proverbs and this book, Ecclesiastes. In the book of 1 Kings, where Solomon first appears, he becomes king of Israel. In the 3rd chapter, it says that Solomon took great care to follow the advice of his father David, the example of his father David. He took all that learning to heart and did his best to live in accordance with the laws that God had established. He made sacrifices to God. In fact, he was such an overachiever that he gave more sacrifices than what were necessary. And God rewards this lifelong obedience and this desire by coming to Solomon in a dream and saying, I will give you whatever you want. Anything you ask for in the whole wide world, I will give to you, Solomon. What do you want? Solomon, who is already wiser than I would be in the situation, acknowledges his inexperience, his youth, the great responsibility that's been laid upon his shoulders to lead God's people, and he asks God for the ability to discern between right and wrong. Some say between good and evil. Essentially, he asks for wisdom. So much better than what I would ask for. And God grants this and more. Because Solomon was so selfless, because he asked for wisdom and not for, money and fame, God says, I'm going to grant that request, but I'm also going to bless you with unimaginable wealth, honor, and a long life to boot. God says he's going to do this in a measure like he has never done before, and he will never do again in the history of creation. So what does Solomon do with all this knowledge, all this wealth, all this power, all this time, with the long life that God has given him? Well, Solomon does a lot of everything. He does everything he can think of. We're going to go through a whole list of his accomplishments next week. I'm not going to do that, but spoiler alert, he does more than any of us are ever going to do in 100 lifetimes. And how does he feel when it's all said and done? When he looks back over his life and sees all that he has accomplished, all that he has done? Well, that's where today's scripture comes in. Some of you looked at me with furrowed brow as we read this passage today because you went, this is kind of depressing. We sang Kansas is Dust in the Wind in the first service. Okay, y'all don't know that song. That's okay. But this is a real introspective moment that King Solomon is having. This is a gut check, an evaluation of all that has come before, his experiences, his successes, his failures. And he begins this verse with this kind of callback that he keeps coming back to over and over again throughout Ecclesiastes. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. The Hebrew word here is sometimes translated as vapor or mist. It implies that it's something that's there and then it disappears. Like a bubble that's blown and is floating on the wind and then it's gone. They're ephemeral. They're short-lived. And if you have children, you know that you can't just blow one bubble, right? Once the bubble pops, you got to blow more bubbles and keep blowing the bubbles and keep blowing the bubbles, keep blowing the bubbles. He reflects on the work of his hands and the generations that will come and go, the circular path of life, the meandering ways that nature and creation all seem to work, the repetitive nature of that. The sun rises, the sun sets, and then the sun scurries back to the other side to come up again. The wind blows, the stream goes to the ocean, sea isn't full, he doesn't understand the water cycle like our kids do. He looks at it all and goes, it's really kind of wearisome. What has been done will be, what will be done has already been done. And I know this sounds kind of depressing, like we need to be kind of worried about Solomon. Maybe he needs to go talk to somebody. Maybe he needs a prescription and he'll feel better. This is, every broken-hearted teenager, every midlife crisis. This is that moment in your life when you ask yourself, what does it all mean? Does it mean anything at all? I heard a pastor once remark, does anything else in creation ever feel this way except for humanity? Does your dog ever question its existence? No, your dog's just happy. Feed me, throw me the ball, throw the ball 1,000,000 times. This never gets old. Keep going. Do animals in the wilds of Africa ever wonder, what's the purpose of it all? No, they're just trying not to be eaten by the other things that are lurking on the savannah. Do trees and plants ever ponder the fact that they're rooted in one place, nothing ever changes but the seasons? Probably not. They don't have brains. But it does point to our unique place in creation as human beings. We have a unique ability in all of creation to look introspectively at our lives and wonder about things much larger than ourselves. There is a yearning that is built into the human heart. We seek meaning. We seek knowledge. We want to know and to understand. And I think it comes back to the idea that within us is this soul, the spark of the divine that God has given us. This is the soul work of being a human being. Acknowledging that sometimes just being here can be a little overwhelming. It'd be easy to be crushed by the weight of it, to feel that everything is meaningless. And Solomon tries to fill up his life with everything he can. Power and possessions and pleasures and property. He does it all and he still feels this hole inside him. This hole in the soul that none of the things of this world can fill. It's just bubbles popping in the wind, a holy dissatisfaction that is built into him. There is a yearning for something more. And we all know people who tried to fill that hole with all sorts of things. Maybe you, like I, have tried to fill that hole with all kinds of different things. The car, the body, the popularity, the education, the house, the relationship, the marriage, the children, the money, the safety, the comfort, the sex, the drugs, the rock and roll. Have you not seen? And have you not heard? The people who chased that dream and caught it and realized it didn't solve their problems after all. In fact, their problems were still there. Their struggles were still present. They have filled their life with all their dreams come true and realized that the hole is still there. It's a yearning within us. A yearning within us that cannot be satisfied by anything created. It's something that can only be fulfilled by the Creator. That yearning is something that God gave you and gave me. That dissatisfaction, I believe, is part of what God plants inside us that draws us continually back to Him again and again and again. Because we're told there's a lot of things out there that are going to satisfy us. There is so much in our culture, in our world, that clamors for our attention. So much that stirs in us that want, that desire. And we try to fill that hole. And I think in all that desire, we oftentimes fail to recognize that what we're really being called to do is to steward, to tend to our soul. We fail to make the effort necessary to develop that which is already within us through worship and prayer and study of God's Word, making space for God to speak, acknowledging where all this comes from, serving Christ, loving others, developing our relationship with Christ through the way that we love other people. We want something more, and I think we know in our hearts what that something is, but sometimes we forget. Something keeps us from going after it. Is it our fear? Is it that we think we're going to have to give something up, that something's going to have to change, that it might take away from our other pursuits, our other desires, our other dreams? Is it our job? Is it our relationships and how they would change? Is it the image that we have created in this world that we try so hard to uphold that may not be the real thing? What is holding you back from taking care of the one thing that God has given uniquely to you, your soul? You see, your soul is longing to be taken care of. And Jesus says that He is there to sustain it. All we have to do is look at the names that Jesus gave for Himself. He said, I am bread, I am living water, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Jesus is saying, I'm everything you need. I will sustain you. That's why John Wesley would ask the question of his contemporaries in the 1700s as the Methodist movement was beginning, not how's your day going, not how are you, not how are things going, but how is it with your soul? It's okay to say, my soul isn't so okay today. My soul is troubled, my soul is longing, my soul is hungry. I have neglected my soul. I have not cared for it as I should. I have pursued everything outside of myself and forgotten to tend to the one thing that God gave me when I entered into this world. If you feel this way, you're not alone. You're not alone. You are one of 7.5 billion human beings, give or take, who all have this longing within them. The difference between you and most of those people is that you know in your heart what's missing. You know that which is capable of filling that space that is open within you. You know and recognize that the longing within you cannot be filled by something in this world, but only by that which brought this world into being. You are the steward of your soul. What are you doing to take care of that which God has given you?